She had been walking the same path to the cafe every morning for years. The streets were quiet in the early hours, with only the soft hum of cars and the occasional dog barking somewhere in the distance. She carried a worn leather bag over her shoulder, the kind that had seen better days, but still held everything she needed for the long shifts ahead. Her shoes were scuffed, and her jacket had patches from years of mending, but she moved with a certain quiet determination. Life hadn't been easy, and she had learned to carry its weight with a calmness that surprised most people. The cafe was small but cozy, with a few tables and chairs tucked close together. The walls were painted a warm cream color, with pictures of coffee cups and pastries hanging in mismatched frames. The smell of freshly brewed coffee hit her as soon as she opened the door, mingling with the faint scent of bread from the oven in the back. The barista, a cheerful young man with a wide smile, greeted her with a wave. She smiled back, though the edges of her lips were tinged with tiredness. This was her routine, day after day, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was steady, and steady had kept her going. She moved behind the counter with practiced ease, pulling out orders and calling out names for the regulars. There were people who came in every morning, always ordering the same thing, nodding as they collected their coffee, lost in their own thoughts. She knew them all by sight, sometimes by name, and there was a small comfort in the rhythm of it. She kept her head down most of the time, focused on the tasks in front of her, but sometimes her eyes would wander to the small upright piano in the corner of the cafe, left there by the previous owner. It was old, the keys slightly yellowed, but it had been tuned not long ago. Sometimes, when the cafe was empty, she would sit there for a few minutes, letting her fingers dance over the keys. It was her secret. No one really knew that the quiet waitress who took their orders had music running through her veins. Her life outside the cafe was quieter still. She lived alone in a tiny apartment on the second floor of a brick building just a few blocks away. The walls were bare except for a small calendar and a few postcards from places she would never have the chance to visit. Her furniture was minimal, mostly second-hand pieces she had collected over the years, but her favorite possession was the piano in the corner of her living room, a hand-me-down from a distant relative who had recognized her talent when she was just a child. It was battered and scratched, but when she played, the room seemed to come alive. The notes carried through the apartment, filling the small space with a warmth she didn't always feel in her everyday life. She worked long hours at the cafe, often skipping lunch and sometimes even dinner. Her tips were modest, just enough to cover a little extra for the bills at the end of the month. Some days were exhausting, and she would collapse into her chair at home, staring at the ceiling as she let her mind drift. But no matter how tired she was, she always made time for her music. It wasn't just a hobby. It was the part of her that refused to be quieted, the part that reminded her there was more to life than serving coffee and washing dishes. There were nights when she would sit at the piano and let her fingers wander over the keys, without thinking, improvising melodies that spoke of longing and hope, of small victories and quiet defeats. Sometimes she would close her eyes, losing herself in the music until the sound of the city outside faded away. In those moments, she felt alive in a way that the rest of her day rarely allowed. It was a private world, one that belonged only to her, and she guarded it fiercely. No one needed to know that the waitress they passed by every morning had the power to make a piano sing with emotion. Her friends, such as they were, knew her as quiet, reliable, and hardworking. She wasn't the kind of person to dominate a conversation or draw attention to herself, but those who spent time with her often noticed the subtle spark in her eyes. When she talked about music, she had learned to keep her passions close to her chest, partly because of fear and partly because she didn't want to be judged. The world could be dismissive of people like her, people who worked day jobs and carried dreams in the shadows, on particularly slow afternoons. She sometimes caught herself imagining a different life. She would picture herself on a stage, playing the piano in front of an audience that listened not out of politeness, but out of genuine admiration. She imagined the notes filling a grand hall, the applause ringing in her ears, and for a few fleeting moments, the monotony of her cafe job seemed distant and almost irrelevant. But then the bell above the door would jingle, bringing her back to reality, and she would smile politely at the customer who had just walked in. Life had a way of reminding her that dreams didn't always come easy. Despite the challenges, she found small joys in the routine of her days. The first sip of coffee in the morning, the way sunlight filtered through the cafe windows in the afternoon, the quiet camaraderie among her co-workers. These little things grounded her, gave her a sense of purpose, and reminded her that even in the humdrum of everyday life, beauty could be found. And still, the piano called to her, whispering that there was something more waiting, something beyond the small cafe and the tiny apartment. She often thought about the people she served. There was the man who came in every morning at 8, always reading a newspaper and muttering to himself. The elderly woman who ordered tea and a scone and always smiled at her warmly. The young couple who shared a table by the window and whispered quietly to each other. Each person had their story, their worries, their small victories and defeats. And she sometimes imagined writing music inspired by them. The idea of connecting with someone, even in such a fleeting way, through her music was deeply compelling. On weekends, when the cafe was quieter, she would linger after her shift, allowing herself 10-15 minutes at the piano. She would play pieces she had learned long ago, letting the music flow freely without restriction. The notes seemed to carry all the feelings she didn't have words for, the exhaustion, the hope, the tiny sparks of joy that punctuated her otherwise ordinary life. In those moments, she wasn't just a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, a person capable of moving others with the sound of her piano. Some nights, after a particularly long shift, she would walk home under the stars, carrying her bag and the weight of the day, but feeling lighter because of the music that awaited her. The city was quiet then, and she could hear her own thoughts more clearly. She thought about what she wanted, what she dreamed of, and the courage it would take to make those dreams real. She wasn't sure when or how it would happen, but she knew that she couldn't ignore the music inside her forever. Her life was ordinary in many ways, but it was her own, and she cherished it for the little things. The worn shoes, the old jacket, the quiet streets, the smell of coffee, the laughter of customers, and the soft keys of the piano. These were the threads of her existence, and woven through them all was a melody, fragile but persistent, that refused to be silenced. It was the melody of her life, and one day, she hoped, it would reach ears that would truly listen. One morning, as she was wiping down the counter, she noticed a small flyer pinned to the community board near the cafe entrance. It was colorful, with large letters announcing a local music competition. Her eyes lingered on the words, "Open auditions for all ages. Showcase your talent." Her heart skipped a beat. She had seen similar posters before, but had never felt they were meant for someone like her. Today, however, something felt different. She studied the flyer, taking in the details of the date, location, and judges. There was one name that caught her attention, a well-known pianist who had performed in concert halls across the country. She had admired this pianist for years, listening to recordings late at night, imagining herself playing alongside someone so talented. She carefully folded the flyer and tucked it into her apron pocket, trying not to let anyone notice. For the rest of the day, her mind wandered. She carried trays, served coffee, and cleaned tables, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She imagined herself on the stage, sitting at a piano, the spotlight warm on her face, and the audience waiting in silence. She shook her head, telling herself she was being foolish. She was just a waitress. Who would take a simple cafe worker seriously in a competition like this? That evening, she sat in her apartment, staring at her piano. The notes called to her, urging her to consider the possibility that she had ignored for so long. She ran her fingers over the keys, tentative at first, and then with growing confidence. Each chord seemed to echo the excitement and fear she felt inside. The music was no longer just a comfort. It was a question. Should she take the risk? She thought about all the reasons not to do it. The cost of transportation and entry fees, the fear of failure, the embarrassment if she stumbled in front of professionals. She considered staying in her quiet life, safe behind the counter of the cafe, where no one expected more of her. But deep down, she knew she would regret it if she didn't try. There was a tiny voice in her head that whispered, "This is your chance. Don't ignore it." She closed her eyes and let that voice linger. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she took chances, where her talent mattered. The next few days were a whirlwind of thoughts and small preparations. She didn't tell anyone at work about the competition. She didn't want to hear skepticism or pity. Instead, she started practicing in small bursts whenever she could. Early mornings before the cafe opened, late nights after closing, and a few stolen minutes during quiet hours in between. Each practice session was a test, not just of skill, but of courage. The music seemed to give her strength, and for a little while, she felt invincible. Her co-workers noticed a subtle change in her. She moved with more purpose, her back straighter, her smile slightly brighter. She didn't explain why, only offering polite responses when asked. The barista, curious but respectful, occasionally teased her about humming tunes while wiping tables, but she only laughed softly, letting the secret remain hers alone. There was a quiet thrill in carrying something so personal and precious that no one else could take away. She imagined the audition hall in vivid detail, the polished wooden floor, the stage lights, the hum of the crowd, and the judge sitting at a long table with a notebook in front of them. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. Could she do it? Could she sit in front of strangers and pour her heart out through the piano, exposing herself in a way that went beyond words? The thought was terrifying, but also exhilarating. It made her feel alive in a way that serving coffee never could. Her practice sessions became more disciplined. She chose a piece that spoke to her deeply, one that required both technical skill and emotional depth. She played it slowly at first, working out each note and rhythm, making sure she could play it flawlessly. Then she began to add her own feeling to it, letting the music reflect her life, her struggles, and her quiet determination. Sometimes she would pause, her hands hovering over the keys, and tears would slip down her cheeks. The music was her voice, and for the first time, she realized it could be heard by others if she dared to share it. As the audition date approached, anxiety grew. She worried about everything, the possibility of forgetting notes, playing too softly, or not being taken seriously because of her ordinary life. She imagined the audience judging her, whispering about the waitress who thought she could play like a professional. At night, she lay awake thinking about excuses she could give herself to stay home. But every morning, the music called her back, reminding her that she could not ignore her passion. One afternoon, a regular customer noticed the flyer in her pocket. He was a friendly man who often stopped for coffee and chatted briefly before leaving. "Are you thinking of going for this competition?" he asked with a hint of surprise. She hesitated, then shook her head, smiling politely. "Just thinking about it," she said. He nodded, sensing there was more behind her eyes than she let on. "I think you should do it," he said simply, and left. She held onto his words longer than she expected, letting them sink in. Sometimes, a small encouragement from someone who believes in you can spark courage in a way that years of self-doubt cannot. She began imagining what it would feel like to succeed, not for fame or recognition, but for herself. To sit at the piano in front of a judge and play with everything she had, to show the world, even for a brief moment, who she really was. The thought gave her a strange mix of fear and hope, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was fragile, like a small bird learning to fly, but it was enough to keep her moving forward. In the days before the audition, she practiced obsessively, yet allowed herself small breaks. She walked in the park, breathing in the crisp air, letting the world remind her that life was bigger than the cafe, bigger than her fears. She watched children play, couples stroll hand in hand, and elderly people feeding birds, and she realized that everyone carried dreams, some fulfilled, some not. Her own dream was hers to pursue, and she decided she would not let it slip away quietly. On the evening before the audition, she sat at her piano longer than usual. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside her window. She played the piece she had chosen, letting it fill the room completely. Each note carried a part of her soul, the hard days, the lonely nights, the small joys, and the longing for something more. By the end of the session, her fingers ached, but her heart felt lighter. She knew she was ready, or as ready as she could be. The next morning, she woke up early, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She dressed carefully, choosing something simple but neat, clothes that made her feel confident without drawing unnecessary attention. She packed her bag with the essentials: water, sheet music, and a small notebook with reminders for herself. She glanced at the flyer once more, folding it carefully and placing it in her bag. Today, she decided, she would take a step into the unknown. As she walked to the audition, her mind raced with every possibility. She imagined failure, success, and the reactions of the judge and audience. But amidst the whirlwind of thoughts, there was a quiet sense of determination. She had worked for this moment in her own way, silently, without anyone noticing. She had prepared not just technically, but emotionally, and she was ready to share her music with the world. No matter what happened next, she knew she had taken a chance, and that alone felt like victory. The morning of the audition, she woke up with a fluttering in her chest. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The apartment felt different that day, almost charged with energy, as if it knew something important was about to happen. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple outfit that allowed her to move comfortably, yet made her feel presentable. She had spent weeks preparing, but now, standing in front of the mirror, she tried to steady her nerves. Every detail mattered: how she carried herself, how she spoke, even the way her fingers would touch the keys. She practiced deep breathing, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. As she walked to the audition hall, the streets seemed both familiar and strange. The familiar corners of the town suddenly felt larger, more alive. She noticed the small details she usually ignored: the leaves rustling in the wind, the distant sound of children playing, the smell of fresh bread from a bakery. Each step she took brought her closer to the unknown, and the uncertainty thrilled her. She clutched her bag tighter, as if it held her courage, and tried to imagine the stage she would soon face. The audition hall was buzzing with people, some nervously warming up on pianos, others chatting quietly with friends and family. The room smelled of polished wood and faint perfume. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was there. It wasn't to impress anyone, not even the judge. She was there because music had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember. Today, she was giving it a voice outside of her small apartment and the quiet cafe. When her name was called, her stomach tightened. She walked onto the stage, feeling the weight of the eyes on her, but she forced herself to stand tall. The piano stood before her, a grand instrument with polished black keys that gleamed under the lights. She took a seat, adjusted the bench, and laid her hands on the keys. For a moment, everything else faded: the noise, the audience, the judge. All that remained was the piano, the music, and her. She began slowly, each note deliberate, measured, and precise. She could feel the vibrations through her fingertips, the way the sound carried across the room. As the piece progressed, she let herself relax into it, allowing the music to flow naturally. Every chord, every pause, every crescendo was infused with her life experiences: the long hours, the quiet evenings, the dreams she had kept hidden. She wasn't playing to impress. She was playing to express. The room seemed to hold its breath, and she felt a strange connection to everyone in it, as if they could understand the story she was telling without a single word spoken. Her mind drifted briefly to the cafe, to the regulars she served every day, to the tiny apartment where she had spent countless nights playing the piano alone. She thought about the encouragement she had received from strangers, the small moments of inspiration that had kept her going. Each memory added depth to the music, and her fingers moved with a new sense of freedom and confidence. The piece, which had once felt like a challenge, now felt like a conversation between her and the world, between her past and the possibilities of her future. The judge watched her intently, taking notes occasionally but mostly listening. She could feel the scrutiny, but it didn't unsettle her. Instead, it fueled her. She wanted to show that her life, her struggles, and her quiet dedication could translate into something beautiful. With each passing measure, she became more immersed, more alive. Her heart raced not out of fear, but out of the exhilaration of creating something real and meaningful. The audience, too, seemed captivated, their attention fixed on the music. Their usual restlessness silenced as she reached the climax of the piece. Her emotions poured through the keys. It was as if every late night, every day of exhaustion, every small disappointment had been stored in her fingers, and now it was being released in a torrent of sound. The music swelled and filled the room, resonating with a power she had only dreamed of reaching. She could feel the vibrations in her chest, the way the notes lingered in the air, and a tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed by anyone but herself. She played on, letting the emotions guide her, not holding back anything. When the final note faded, there was a brief silence. She sat still, hands hovering over the keys, breathing heavily, trying to absorb the moment. Then, slowly, she looked up. The judge's eyes were glistening, and a small smile tugged at the corners of their mouth. The audience, too, seemed moved, some leaning forward as if drawn closer by the music. She had told her story without words, and it had been heard. After stepping off the stage, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Her legs were shaky, but her heart was light. She had done what she had come to do. She had let her music speak. She walked through the hall, trying to blend in with the other participants, who were chatting and congratulating each other. Some glanced at her curiously, perhaps noticing the intensity with which she had played, but she didn't linger on their reactions. She had given everything she had, and that was enough. Over the next few hours, she found herself replaying the performance in her mind. Every note, every chord progression, every emotional nuance. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the quiet mornings at the cafe, the late nights in her apartment, the small moments of encouragement, and the determination she had summoned despite fear and doubt. She realized that preparation had not been just about mastering the piece, but about preparing herself to be seen, truly seen, for the first time. Her confidence began to grow in unexpected ways. The act of stepping onto the stage, facing the unknown, and giving her all had given her a sense of accomplishment that nothing else in her recent life had. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Each time she recalled the feeling of the keys under her fingers and the resonance of the music through the hall, she felt a spark of pride that warmed her from within. In the days following the audition, she returned to her routine at the cafe, but something inside her had shifted. She moved with a new sense of purpose, carrying herself differently, and even the regular customers noticed the subtle change. Her eyes held a quiet glow, and her smile seemed more genuine, touched by the knowledge that she had dared to step beyond the confines of her ordinary life. Music had given her a chance to express herself in a way she had never thought possible, and it had transformed her, if only in small ways. She continued practicing, not out of obligation, but for the joy it brought her. The piano had always been her companion, but now it felt more like a partner in her journey, a witness to her courage and growth. Each practice session reminded her of the audition hall, the energy of the performance, and the emotions she had poured into the music. She realized that the experience was not just about winning a competition, but about discovering a part of herself that had been waiting patiently to be recognized. The experience also sparked a new perspective on life. She began noticing beauty in everyday moments with a deeper appreciation. The chatter of customers, the aroma of coffee, the rhythm of her daily routine, all seemed more vibrant, more meaningful. Music had opened her eyes to the richness of existence and the power of expression. She understood that her talent was not a frivolous dream, but a reflection of her perseverance, resilience, and humanity. Even as she faced challenges and setbacks in her day-to-day life, the memory of the audition gave her strength. She knew that she could face difficult situations with the same focus and dedication she had shown on stage. It was a lesson she carried silently, one that infused her actions with quiet confidence. Each time she returned home and sat at her piano, she felt a sense of purpose, a reminder that her life was not defined by ordinary routines alone, but by the choices she made to embrace her passions. Her journey was far from over. The audition had been a milestone, a test of courage and skill, but she knew that more challenges awaited. Yet she felt ready, more than ever, to face them. She understood that life was a series of moments, each offering the chance to grow, to learn, and to express oneself fully. And in that realization, she found a deep sense of fulfillment. Music was no longer just a secret joy. It had become a compass, guiding her through the uncertainties of life and reminding her that her voice, her story, and her dreams mattered. The morning of the final performance, she woke up feeling a mix of nerves and excitement that made it hard to eat breakfast. She dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that made her feel confident. She glanced at her piano at home, wishing she could bring it with her. But she knew the stage piano would be different. It didn't matter. The music, the practice, and the emotions she carried were inside her, and that would travel wherever she went. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest, and left her apartment, carrying only her essentials and the courage she had built over weeks of preparation. When she arrived at the hall, it was larger than she had imagined. The room was full of people, some quietly practicing, others chatting nervously. The audience filled the seats gradually, and the buzz of conversation made her heart race. She tried to focus on her breathing, letting each inhale and exhale ground her. She remembered why she was there, to share her music, her story, and herself. No matter what happened, this was her moment to be true to her passion. As she waited for her turn, she watched the other performers. Some were professional looking, confident, and polished. Others seemed as nervous as she felt. She noticed the variety of ages and backgrounds, and it reminded her that talent could come from anywhere. She tried not to compare herself to others, focusing instead on the music she had prepared, the emotions she wanted to convey, and the journey that had brought her to this stage. When her name was called, she felt her stomach tighten. She walked toward the stage, each step deliberate, and tried to push away the fear creeping in. She approached the piano, noticing the smooth black surface of the keys and the polished finish reflecting the stage lights. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a moment to steady herself. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she closed her eyes, letting the memories of practice sessions, late nights, and quiet determination flow through her. She began the piece gently, allowing the first notes to echo through the hall. The sound was different from her piano at home, brighter and louder, but it felt alive. She let the music guide her, each note carrying the emotions she had worked so hard to express. The hall fell silent, the audience captivated by the depth and honesty in her playing. She could feel the energy in the room, a shared connection that transcended words. For the first time, she realized that music could speak directly to the heart, bridging gaps between strangers. As the piece progressed, her confidence grew. She allowed herself to move with the music, her fingers gliding over the keys as she poured her soul into every note. She thought about her life, the long hours at the cafe, the quiet nights practicing alone, and the small moments of joy and struggle. Each emotion found its way into the music, giving it life and authenticity. She wasn't performing for recognition or praise. She was performing because it was the truest expression of who she was. She noticed the judge watching her closely, taking notes occasionally, but mostly observing silently. She could see the intensity in their eyes, the focus, and the attention given to every movement and sound. It made her want to play even more sincerely, to let the music tell the story she had carried inside for so long. She remembered all the encouragement she had received along the way, the small voices that had told her she could do it, and it strengthened her resolve. As the piece reached its climax, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The notes soared, full of emotion and power. She felt every chord reverberate through her body, the sound filling the space around her and touching everyone listening. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't stop. She let the music flow freely, carrying her story of hope, struggle, and quiet determination. Every person in the audience could feel the honesty in her playing, the sincerity in every note, and the vulnerability she displayed with courage. The judge's eyes glistened with emotion, and a single tear rolled down their cheek. She hadn't noticed it at first, too absorbed in the music, but when she did, it made her feel a deep sense of connection. For the first time, she realized that her performance had reached someone profoundly, moving them in ways words never could. The thought gave her strength, and she played with even more passion, letting the final notes linger in the air with intensity and grace. When the last note faded, there was a moment of silence, a collective pause where the audience absorbed what they had just experienced. She sat still, her hands hovering above the keys, her breath coming in short bursts. Then the room erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming, yet deeply gratifying. She looked up and saw faces smiling, eyes shining, and people leaning forward in appreciation. The applause wasn't just for her skill. It was for the honesty, emotion, and heart she had shared through her music. After stepping off the stage, her legs felt weak, but her heart was light. She had faced her fears, expressed her soul, and shared a piece of herself with the world. She walked through the hall, trying to process the experience, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and elation. The other performers congratulated her, and though she offered polite smiles, she felt a quiet joy that no words could fully capture. This moment belonged to her, and she would carry it with her forever. The judge approached her, still wiping a tear from their cheek. They spoke softly, praising not just her technical skill, but the emotional depth and sincerity of her performance. They said it was rare to encounter someone who could play with such authenticity, someone who allowed their life story to shine through the music. She listened, humbled and moved, realizing that her effort, dedication, and courage had made a tangible impact on someone she admired deeply. In the days following the performance, she returned to her routine at the cafe, but she felt different. Each interaction with customers, each task she performed, seemed infused with a new energy. She walked with a subtle confidence, carrying the memory of the stage and the music within her. She practiced the piano at home with renewed enthusiasm, inspired by the knowledge that her music could touch hearts beyond her small apartment walls. The experience also taught her about resilience and self-belief. She understood that talent alone was not enough. It was the willingness to step into the unknown, to take risks, and to share one's authentic self that created meaningful moments. She carried this lesson into all aspects of her life, approaching challenges with a quiet determination and a deeper sense of purpose. Music had become more than a passion. It had become a guiding force, shaping her character and her perspective on life. She began to notice subtle changes in herself. She was more attentive to the beauty in everyday moments, more patient with others, and more confident in expressing her thoughts and feelings. The courage she had found on the stage permeated her daily life, influencing her decisions and interactions. Even small acts, like offering a warm smile to a regular customer or taking a moment to enjoy the sunlight streaming through the cafe window, carried a new significance. Her music had shown her that life, too, could be a symphony of small, meaningful moments. The connection she had felt with the audience and the judge lingered in her mind. She realized that sharing one's talent and emotions openly could create bonds that transcended time and space. The performance was not just an event. It was a turning point, a moment of recognition and validation that had been long overdue. She felt grateful for the journey, the struggles, and the courage that had brought her to this point. It was proof that perseverance and authenticity could break through barriers, even when the world seemed indifferent. In quiet moments at home, she reflected on the audition and her performance. She thought about how far she had come from the days of practicing alone in her apartment. Unsure if anyone would ever hear her music, she realized that the act of stepping onto the stage had transformed her, allowing her to see herself as capable, talented, and worthy of recognition. The experience had awakened a sense of purpose that she intended to nurture and follow, wherever it might lead. Her journey was far from over. The performance had opened doors, but it had also revealed new challenges and opportunities. She felt ready to face them with the same determination and courage that had carried her through the audition. Music had given her a voice, and now she knew she could use it to reach beyond her own limitations. Each note she played, each melody she created, became a testament to her resilience and her belief in the power of following one's passion. As she returned to her daily routine, she carried the memory of the stage and the applause within her, a source of motivation and inspiration. The cafe, the streets, and the small apartment were still part of her life, but they were now infused with the awareness that she could achieve more, that her voice mattered, and that her music could touch others in profound ways. She understood that the performance had been more than a moment of personal triumph. It had been a demonstration of the human spirit, of courage, and of the beauty that emerges when one dares to share their authentic self. The days after the performance were filled with a strange combination of normalcy and excitement. She returned to the cafe, greeted by familiar faces and routines, but there was a new awareness in the way she moved, a subtle confidence that had been absent before. Each cup of coffee she served, each tray she carried, each interaction with customers felt different. She carried the memory of the stage, the music, and the applause within her, a quiet fuel that gave her actions a new energy. She smiled more freely, listened more attentively, and found joy in the small moments she had once overlooked. The competition results were announced a few days later, and she felt a nervous flutter in her chest as she checked her email. Her heart raced as she read the message. She had been recognized not just for her technical skill, but for the emotional depth and sincerity of her performance. There were offers for further performances, invitations to participate in workshops, and even the possibility of studying with a professional pianist. She read the words over and over, hardly daring to believe them. It felt surreal, as if a dream she had barely allowed herself to imagine was unfolding before her. She spent the next few weeks making careful plans. She didn't quit her job immediately. The cafe had been a steady part of her life, and she appreciated the security it provided. But she began arranging performances, connecting with mentors, and practicing more seriously. Each opportunity was a step into a new world, a chance to grow as a musician and as a person. She felt both excitement and apprehension, knowing that these changes would require effort, commitment, and courage. Yet the thrill of pursuing her passion outweighed any fears. Friends and acquaintances began to notice the change in her. There was a quiet glow about her, a sense of purpose that radiated from her actions and words. Some expressed surprise, others admiration, and a few even sought advice. Curious about how she had taken a chance and succeeded, she spoke humbly, focusing on the importance of dedication, practice, and following one's passion. She wanted people to understand that her journey had not been instant or easy, but that persistence and courage could lead to remarkable results. Her performances became increasingly rewarding. She played at small gatherings, local events, and community halls, gradually building a reputation for her emotional and heartfelt music. Audiences connected with her playing, drawn to the authenticity and honesty she brought to each piece. She found joy in seeing people moved by her music, understanding that her notes carried not just melodies, but emotions and stories that resonated with listeners. Each performance reinforced her belief that she was on the right path, and that her talent had a place in the world. Despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded. She continued to appreciate the simple aspects of her life, the walk to the cafe, the aroma of coffee, the quiet evenings at her apartment. These moments reminded her of where she had come from and of the determination it had taken to reach this point. She understood that success was not just about recognition, but about maintaining authenticity, staying connected to one's roots, and valuing the journey as much as the destination. The judge, who had been moved by her audition, reached out personally, expressing admiration for her dedication and artistry. They offered guidance, encouragement, and mentorship, helping her navigate the opportunities that were opening up. Their support was invaluable, providing not only technical advice, but also the reassurance that her music had genuine value. She felt grateful for the connection, recognizing that her courage to step onto the stage had created meaningful relationships and opened doors she had never anticipated. Over time, she began to perform in larger venues, encountering audiences that numbered in the hundreds. Each performance brought new challenges and rewards, testing her skills, resilience, and emotional depth. Yet she approached every opportunity with humility and dedication, remembering the small cafe where her journey had begun and the piano that had been her constant companion. Her music continued to evolve, shaped by experience, feedback, and her growing confidence. She realized that her journey was not a destination, but an ongoing path of growth, discovery, and expression. In moments of reflection, she often thought about the lessons she had learned along the way. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Talent alone was not enough. Perseverance, practice, and dedication were equally important. Authenticity and emotional honesty had the power to touch hearts and create meaningful connections. And perhaps most importantly, she learned to trust herself and her abilities, to believe that her dreams were worth pursuing, and to honor the voice within her that had always sought to be heard. She also discovered the joy of inspiring others. Young musicians, cafe patrons, and friends began to share their own stories of struggle and aspiration with her, seeking guidance, encouragement, and reassurance. She listened, offered advice, and shared her journey, understanding that her experience could motivate and uplift others. The realization that her courage had a ripple effect, encouraging others to follow their passions, brought her a deep sense of fulfillment. She felt that her music had become not just a personal expression, but a bridge connecting people, emotions, and experiences. Her daily life gradually expanded to accommodate the new opportunities. She scheduled practice sessions, rehearsals, and performances alongside her cafe shifts. She learned to balance responsibilities, manage time effectively, and prioritize her well-being. The discipline required was demanding, but she embraced it willingly, recognizing that her efforts would shape her future. Each day became a blend of routine and adventure, of familiar comfort and exhilarating possibility. She found joy in both the ordinary and the extraordinary, understanding that both were essential parts of life. Despite her growing recognition, she remained humble and approachable. She never forgot the quiet mornings at the cafe, the late nights practicing alone, or the fear she had felt before stepping onto the stage. These memories grounded her, reminding her of the resilience, patience, and determination that had carried her through challenges. She used these experiences to guide her decisions, interactions, and performances, ensuring that she remained true to herself and her values. As her reputation grew, she also explored new creative avenues. She experimented with composing original pieces, blending classical techniques with personal expression. She collaborated with other musicians, discovering the joy of shared creativity and the unique dynamics of ensemble performance. Each project brought fresh challenges, learning opportunities, and moments of inspiration. She felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that extended beyond personal achievement, knowing that her music could contribute to the broader artistic community. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, she returned to her apartment and sat at her piano, reflecting on the journey she had taken. The memories of fear, doubt, and perseverance intermingled with the pride, joy, and satisfaction of accomplishment. She realized that the journey had been transformative, shaping her not only as a musician but as a person. The music had been her guide, her voice, and her companion, carrying her through challenges and leading her to experiences that had once seemed impossible. She understood that recognition and success were gratifying, but they were not the ultimate goal. The true reward was the ability to express herself fully, to touch hearts, and to inspire others through her music. Each performance was a reaffirmation of her passion, a celebration of her journey, and a testament to the power of courage, dedication, and authenticity. She had discovered that life's greatest fulfillment comes not from avoiding challenges, but from embracing them, taking risks, and pursuing what one loves with unwavering commitment. In the months that followed, she continued to grow both personally and professionally. Her schedule became busier, filled with performances, rehearsals, and new projects. Yet she maintained balance by appreciating the simple pleasures that had always brought her joy. She spent quiet evenings at home, practicing at the piano, reflecting on her journey, and savoring the satisfaction of progress. She visited the cafe occasionally, reconnecting with familiar faces and sharing her experiences with those who had known her before her music reached a wider audience. Through it all, she remained true to the essence of her journey. She never lost sight of the quiet determination, resilience, and love for music that had fueled her from the beginning. She continued to nurture her skills, explore new possibilities, and express herself authentically. Her music became a reflection of her life, carrying stories of perseverance, hope, and human connection to every listener. The journey that began with quiet practice sessions and tentative dreams had blossomed into a life filled with creativity, purpose, and fulfillment. She often thought back to the first day she discovered the flyer for the competition, the hesitation, and the small voice that had encouraged her to take a chance. That decision, seemingly minor at the time, had led to a series of experiences that transformed her life. She realized that every choice, every risk, and every act of courage contributes to the shaping of one's path. Life was a series of moments, and each moment offered the opportunity to grow, to express oneself, and to make a difference. Her story became an inspiration to those around her. People